Gentlemen, for years, the so-called pickup community failed you. Too many men were led to believe it took tricks and games to make women want to get physical with you. But of course, the truth is that sexual attraction and acting on it is the most natural of human responses. So yes, women crave sex as much as you do. No tricks or game playing is ever required. And that means there has to be a way to move from a platonic relationship to a sexual one with a woman in a way that ignites that spark and respects both her and yourself. Well, finally, this month's masterclass for men will deliver all the secrets, not a bunch of random piecemeal tactics like you may be used to seeing elsewhere, but rather everything you need to know and do to go from having just met her, or worse, just friends, to a whole lot more, all in one place. So if you happen to be listening to this episode within 5 days of its release, grab your ticket to this important and highly anticipated masterclass for men, which will be called From Platonic to Sexual at mountaintoppodcast.com/masterclass.
Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
How's it going, gentlemen? Welcome to yet again another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. As always, I am your host, Scott McKay. You can find me pretty much by searching my name, SCOTMCKAY, on virtually all social media platforms. You can also reach us on the web at mountaintoppodcast.com. Listen, gentlemen, I've just completely revamped that website. It's all new, and there are a lot of special goodies there for you, including new downloads for new books. So go there and get you some, mountaintoppodcast.com. And if you haven't joined our Facebook group, guys, definitely do that as well. It's the Mountaintop Summit on Facebook. With me today is a returning guest and one of your favorites. He's a good dude. He's all about living a masculine life of virtue. His name is Frank Miniter, and currently he is the editor-in-chief of America's First Freedom, which is the NRA's magazine, the National Rifle Association. So he talks a lot about masculinity. He talks about hunting. In some of his books, he's talked about being a better man. He's talked about Ernest Hemingway and running with the bulls in Spain. So he's an interesting cat, as always, with a lot to say on a variety of topics. Today, we're specifically going to talk about one that has been in my queue for quite a while, and I just needed to connect with a guy like Frank to cover it with a big, heavy hammer. So without anything further, we're going to talk about why men can't be passive. And Frank Miniter, welcome back, my friend.
Hey, Scott. Good to be here.
Yeah, man. As always, you and I have talked about a variety of interesting things in the past, and the guys have loved our conversations. And I'll tell you where this particular topic really landed on my radar screen. It just seems to me nowadays, Frank, that we talk a lot about, someone attacking our democracy here in the United States, and I think abroad, they're also wrestling with that. But it seems to me, Frank, that, democracy, our right to vote democratically, is really a subset of the greater topic of freedom, and especially during let's just call a spade. During the pandemic, we were told to lock down, listen to what they told us to do on social media, and in return, they would send us money for nothing and our checks for free. The first, thanks to the government, and the subsidies for COVID, and the latter, thanks to HD porn at our fingertips for free. And meanwhile, people were not being able to make their own decisions. They were being told, hey, you need to take this shot, stay at home, don't go outside, things that are more like what China would say and do and demand of their citizens than an allegedly free country like the United States would. And we saw Canada and Australia do just jaw-dropping things in the name of, quote-unquote, protecting their population from COVID. But really, it was an assault on their freedoms. And the interesting part, Frank, and I want you to take it away with this, is a lot of those freedoms haven't even really come back. And it doesn't seem people are arguing much about that because in their minds, hey, the pain quotient went down, the pleasure quotient went up, so why complain? Why is freedom even a thing anymore, right?
Right. I literally, yesterday just got back from Canada. I was moose hunting in northern Alberta. And what surprised me on the first flight in on Canada Air was this pilot who gets on the audio there, and he starts telling all the passengers, if you don't do everything we tell you to do, we will put you in jail. I mean, he literally said that. We will put you in jail. We will take you off in handcuffs. You have to obey our every command. And as he was going into this diatribe, I was looking around at the people on the plane. Is anybody protesting? Did they at least have a quizzical look on their face? And people were just shrugging and acting like nothing was being said. And I was just shaking my head and had my hands up and was looking around. And finally, I did see one other woman nodding with me, like, what is with this pilot? And so I go into Canada, and they're now in the process of taking away a lot of their firearms, which is a big part of their individual rights, or of individual rights. Let me put it that way. It's a very natural right to be able to defend your own life. And I asked a lot of the Canadians there, and they just kept telling me, why can't they just leave us alone? And this is Western Canadians, of course, who are dealing with what's coming out of Toronto and more Eastern Canada. So the cultural divide that's taking place there is also taking place here, as across the Western Hemisphere. But I just found it fascinating to walk into that. If I was now standing in front of a group of men, as I'm now speaking to a group of men, I would ask them, are you an individual or are you part of a collective? That is where they want you to be, a part of a collective. If you're not an individual, I can't imagine why any decent woman would take you seriously. There may be some out there that would like a man who isn't very manly, who's not strong, but I don't think they'd like him very far. I don't think you're really going to find a strong relationship unless you have some individual strength, unless you understand who you are as an individual and you project that forward to them. I mean, I know that's the way I see it when I talk with friends about their relationships, and spending so much time talking with you, Scott, I know that's what you talk about.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine, Frank, a woman being attracted to a man who's a sheeple. He just does what he's told without questioning anything. And the reason for that, of course, is, well, what good is a man if he's not a provider, a protector, and or a leader? And that abdication of our masculine responsibility to be such a leader, a provider, and a protector, on the surface seems like a nothing burger to a lot of men out there who are perfectly content to live this comfortable life and kind of nestle themselves into a comfort familiarity zone where they're being catered to. But these are also often the same men who are wondering why they can't get any girlfriends, why they can't get anyone to be attracted to them. And they're also the same guys who end up drowning in porn and blaming all the women for not being attracted to them. But it's fundamentally a thing, just like you said, Frank, that we've got to be independent thinkers. We've got to be able to think quickly on our feet. And, that's one of the reasons why humor is attractive to women. But we also have to be the kind of guy who can make decisions and make those decisions in the best interest of our family and then act on those decisions. I'm appalled by what you heard when flying into Canada. I got to tell you, Frank, I've lost track of how many countries I've flown into, but I've been to 110 of them, and I have never heard anything so draconian come over the PA system of a commercial flight as what you've heard. And I've gone to some pretty totalitarian countries. I mean, the closest I can think to that is, if you bring drugs into our country, you'll be jailed immediately, or pain of death upon being a drug dealer or something like that. But even then, it's written on the immigration card, not spoken out loud by the pilot. I mean, at the very least, that's just bad marketing. But clearly someone put them up to that, Frank, and it's because whoever the powers that be are that mandated that announcement think they can get away with it. And just like you noticed, an entire plane load of people, including a lot of Americans, I presume, just passively agreed. That's dangerous.
Right. That kind of pilot is a part of a culture, and he's riding that wave, and he thinks now he could say that. It might be his personality to be dictatorial, but in a different age, different time, different culture, he wouldn't have been emboldened to try to take that sort of action over the rest of us, which would get me to the second point they would make on this kind of thing. With rights come responsibility. That's not taught today about our rights. You read our U.S. Bill of Rights, for example, it isn't taught that in that there are basically a list of restrictions on government. That's what they are. They're negative liberties, which sounds awful, right? But that's what they are designed to do, to stop government from infringing upon our rights. But those rights that we've held from government that are in jeopardy, but are still somewhat held from government, come with a responsibility for a populace, for us to stand up as individuals and use those rights properly. It comes to First Amendment, our speech. I mean, hate speech it's been abused in a way, and it isn't really something that exists. I mean, we're supposed to say something. You're allowed to say something until you reach a certain level of where you're derogatory, and you can be stopped by private means, but not by government means. Our freedom of religion and so on has been stepped on too much by the U.S. government, though lately the Supreme Court has had a couple of good decisions. Our Second Amendment, we're just in this massive battle right now. We just won a massive Supreme Court case here for the individual liberty, but then a lot of states have now pushed back, New York and California leading the way to stop us from carrying our freedom wherever we go so we can protect ourselves and our loved ones and so on. But by protecting myself, and I do carry, just to grab that as an example, there's a lot of responsibility to that. I can't carry in an unsafe way. I can't really even let it be seen. It's brandishing. If I ever had to use in that weird, awful situation, that gun in self-defense, I'd have to do it in a very safe and appropriate way. And people, this is what's so wonderful about that particular right. People largely do. It's actually very hard to find a case with a citizen carrying their firearm legally who takes it out in order to stop, say, a bad guy, and uses it in an unsafe way. As I look, and I work for a magazine that writes about this, I'm having a hard time finding a case where somebody tried to take down an active murderer and wounded a good person in the process. It doesn't happen. People do take that part of it in a responsible way, but I don't see it across our culture and certainly out of Hollywood and stuff preaching that these rights have responsibility, and as men we have to stand up and use them appropriately.
Frank, in acknowledgement of the simple fact that you work for the NRA, these guys need to know that, of course, you're pro-Second Amendment. You wouldn't be on the payroll with those guys if you weren't. I would love for you, from your unique perspective, Frank, to describe to these guys why the Second Amendment is there, why it's important, and maybe give a counter argument to those folks out there who legitimately have a very good point. I mean, there are a whole lot of guns in this country, and it seems to me the low-hanging fruit when it comes to stopping gun violence is to get rid of the tools that are allowing that to happen. I understand that point, but I also understand it to be a little short-sighted vis-a-vis what you were just starting to discuss, which is our basic fundamental right as humans. It's not an American right. It's a God-given right. That's how the Constitution was written, sure. But I'd like for you to riff on that a little bit and talk to us about why when people say we need to get rid of guns, they're talking about getting rid of freedoms, because I'm not sure that's clear to everybody anymore.
Well, it should be. It's there through history. I mean, look back across time and try to find a culture where the people who are disarmed and still free and still have any other part of their liberty left intact and are left without the ability to defend themselves. It just simply doesn't exist. And looking even in this nation's history, without firearms, we wouldn't have been able to stand up as we did, or as the people before us did, and push out the British. It just wouldn't have happened. If you jump forward to today, in Ukraine, would they be able to fight back for their own liberty, their own freedom against this Russian assault, unless they had firearms, unless they had some access to the ability to defend themselves? It's a basic human need. Talk to a woman who's home alone, and there's suddenly someone trying to kick in their front door, just rattling their windows, and they don't have a firearm. They call the police. They have to wait minutes at best for a police officer to get there to save them from a calamity that they might only have seconds. So they do have to defend themselves. Your life is that quickly on the line. Your liberty, your literal liberty, is that tenuous that it is there. We don't like to think that way. We're in a nation, and you're right, we're in a nation with 400 million guns and over 100 million gun owners. And if you look at the statistics, you'll find that almost never does an armed citizen who legally has that firearm use that firearm to commit any sort of crime. Almost all the crimes are committed by people who can't legally own that firearm, have that firearm illegally in one form or fashion or another. So if you disarm law-abiding citizens, if you were to pass those kind of laws and somehow erase the Second Amendment out of the U.S. Constitution and were to disarm those people, you would still have a criminal class armed, which has happened. It happened in Russia when they or the USSR, even before that, when they banned firearms. The criminal class still has them. You can find that even in today's UK, where the criminal class still has pistols, still has firearms. Certainly find that across Latin America and so on. You don't have to look far to find the examples of what happens to a disarmed people. But when it gets to that question, I like to look at the individual, and especially the vulnerable classes in our society. And, a person who's handicapped, an elderly person, what have you, and they're home alone. It gives them autonomy. It gives them freedom until police can arrive. Our heroes in blue can get there. But sometimes that takes a long time. You look at even something like the Pulse nightclub with that terrorist as he walked around for hours, just killing people. Just if he found someone who wasn't dead yet, finishing them off. If just one person in that nightclub had been carrying concealed, that could have changed everything. We saw it in Uvalde, where the police took so much time to go there. We do have to take some accountability, as I said, responsibility for ourselves. And those rights do bring that responsibility to us. So you have to think about, how would I protect myself in that worst case scenario?
Well, like even in Uvalde, which of course every politician who is competing against a Republican out there is making hay from. That
Right.
was an issue where even having the police there wasn't enough. I mean, parents of the kids inside were the de facto first responders in a couple cases, and they were being held back from going inside by the police who were out there sitting on their hands. And of course, this case is getting a lot of press nowadays, and nobody is denying that that was a poor excuse for a first response from that particular police department.
Well, the police actually don't have to protect you. If they fail to save someone's life or to help someone in need, you can't sue them for that. That's been tried and it's failed, and there are good reasons why it fails. I'm not saying that they should be sued for stopping every calamity or being there on time and so on. But if they show up 2 hours later, even though they answered your 911 call until well after everything takes place, you can't sue them for that. They can't be held liable for that. So, yeah, I get both sides of that one, but the individual still then has to be prepared to protect themselves.
Well, it's like if you call an ambulance or the fire department, you can't sue them if your house burns down before they get there either. So there's some level of personal responsibility for our personal safety. And, when you're talking about liberties, the right to life is fundamental to the Constitution. So if the government owns your very life, then you have fundamentally lost the foundation of all the rest of your freedoms. So interestingly enough, to go back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, I took a concealed carry course here in Texas. I think we might have mentioned it the first or second time you were on, Frank. And half the class were women, particularly attractive young women who were looking to pack heat so they could protect themselves from guys who were bigger and stronger than they were. So first of all, it's a misnomer that anything having to do with guns is reflective of what's commonly and erroneously known nowadays as quote unquote toxic masculinity. It's a farce. And indeed, one of the ways we're getting, mind controlled is the widespread expectation that the logical fallacy of all or nothing is actually going to work in reining the masses in to do what the powers that be want them to do. In other words, all guns are owned by men who want to kill you, who just want to be violent. There's no other reason to have a gun than if you want to be violent. Another one is, of course, with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. It's all men, particularly white men, who are demanding women carry all babies full term, and all women want the right to abort their pregnancies. That's assumed. Well, that's a fallacy, and it's laughable because any man who's red-blooded knows that when the girlfriend gets pregnant, who's pressuring the girl to get the abortion? Well, it's the boyfriend who doesn't want to pay child support or have any responsibility. So it's a joke. And now that very same all-or-nothing mindset's coming home to roost, with the guns. Beto O'Rourke, during his run for the presidency, said, hell yeah, we're coming for your AR-15. And the presumption there, the reason why he could just so glibly pronounce that, is because the prevailing conventional wisdom is nobody needs an AR-15. And of course, they would love for you to mix up an AR-15 in your mind with an AK-47, which of course isn't true at all, but they don't seem to correct those mistakes when they're made in print or out loud. Now you have Beto O'Rourke running for governor of Texas, and in the first debate, and only debate they had, he backpedaled from the question of whether he still believes that everybody should have their AR-15s confiscated. He changed the question when asked it 2 different times. Well, you could argue that he's running for national office from one pulpit, and now that he's dealing with a statewide office in Texas, it's a big uh-oh that he ever said that. But here's the thing. When the conflict in Ukraine with the Russians started, nobody doubted it was a good thing that Ukrainian citizens were armed with the best weapons they could get. No one doubted it. All of a sudden, we see in living color on our TV screen every night why normal citizens should have the right to bear something like an AR-15. But back in the United States, we still want to play a double standard. And interestingly enough, politically speaking, if you're an independent thinker like I am, and a lot of these guys listening, why are we funding Ukraine to the level of $40-50 billion in U.S. funding, while at the same time denying that right to our citizens? It just doesn't make any sense.
Or even look at the facts. There are really debates between what's a semi-automatic firearm and a full auto. They like to conflate those two terms. And a semi-automatic firearm, we've had these since the late 19th century. That's how long we've been able to buy them. Since that technology was first developed, they were sold to civilians. Even the AR-15, in the same year that the military, the U.S. military, began to contract for the similar M16, the full auto, the AR-15 was being sold to the public. There were ads running in American Rifle magazine and so on in 1963, 1964. At that same time period, the Colt was making some for civilians and some for, well, another version, the M16, a different rifle for the military, but a similar looking to someone who doesn't know the difference between semi-automatic and fully automatic. We've had these firearms forever. Statistically, they're trying to make the point that there are more mass murder events than ever. That's even a hard point to make once you really start going back and counting them and seeing what has happened throughout history of not just the United States, but of the world. That's not exactly true. But I think we should all come together just on that basic issue and say, don't we want to keep guns out of the hands of bad guys? Yes, we certainly do. So let's work together and find ways to do that and do it better. Let's actually, instead of this bail reform policies we have now, let's actually go and lock these people up if they use a firearm inappropriately and so on. Instead, we're finding ourselves in this weird place where the bad guys are not being prosecuted and the good guys are being called bad guys.
Frank, what are the ramifications of the state of the world relative to everything you're talking about right now as it concerns our freedoms in your mind? Because you're right. They're letting criminals out of jail and criminalizing decent behavior by people who simply don't agree politically with the prevailing political party. That's troublesome. Talk to us about that.
Right. If you turn everything on its head and say the bad guy is just a victim and the victims he's attacking are somehow be wrong for being there or just discounted altogether, then we flip the whole thing upside down. And they're using that too often as a way to further erode our freedom, because they know if they can take away, they can cancel somebody on social media, they can take away First Amendment freedoms via Twitter and Facebook and so on, the government coercing them. They can take away our Second Amendment, thereby weaken us so we can't actually defend ourselves, protect ourselves, be individual and autonomous, and so on, right down the line through the Bill of Rights. If they can weaken the individual to that extent, then they can turn us into sheep. Then they can do with us as they will. You know, the far left tends to be very authoritarian, whereas the conservative right tends to say, hey, why don't you just leave me alone? And, I started this by talking about Canada, and that's what I heard in Western Canada. Why can't you just leave us alone? Let us go on with our lives and be peaceable, good people. If we break some law, then punish us, because the individual should be punished individually. That's how the justice system is supposed to work. We're not guilty because we happen to be men.
You know, the counter argument to everything that you just said, Frank, from the left is, no, it's the Republicans. It's the MAGA extremists who are the biggest threat to our country, and they're the ones who are the fascists. They're the ones who are trying to take away a woman's right to choose. They're the ones who are trying to install Donald Trump as dictator. And the people who are coming from that political mindset believe it. Meanwhile, when you watch Fox News or, whichever media outlet, certainly daytime talk radio is ruled by conservatives. They believe that it's the Democrats who are the fascists. And the recurring theme, to bring this full circle, Frank, is always they're a threat to democracy. But it seems to me, Frank, that there's an assault on our freedoms quietly under the surface. And it's almost like a deflection to talk mostly about free and equal voting systems at the expense of everything else that's being taken away from us in terms of our freedom. And it's kind of like a mind trick. What's your take on both the left and the right thinking the other side is the most fascist threat to our democracy? What do we say to that? How do we even have a conversation?
Well, I think both are traps. I think if we talk about CNN or Fox News on the left and the right, we're going to get stuck into their narratives and not that I'm against everything either one of them does. I actually watch both.
Yeah, me too.
What we have to do is look at the common ground that we're supposed to have. And the common ground that is historically almost always been there. There are different periods when it became difficult, and right from the beginning, it became John Adams in the beginning had the Alien and Sedition Act, which took away a lot of freedoms right in the beginning, and he didn't get a second term in office because of that. And it was right in the beginning of our republic. So this has been going on for a long time. We have to agree that we have individual rights and that the individual is above the state. That's the basic premise within our Constitution, and certainly within the first 10 amendments, which are our Bill of Rights, that we have to agree that we have free speech. You shouldn't be canceled, for example, by the left, by a woke warrior, because you say something they find uncomfortable or impolitic. Your religion shouldn't be impacted in the same regard. And that battle's been ongoing. And to go right through the Bill of Rights with that same argument, that the Second Amendment is an individual basic right. And you have to understand what that is. And it is regulated, and it must be regulated in a certain way. But there's a common ground that has to happen there. You have to agree that, yes, the individual does have the right to defend their own life. That's a basic premise. It's a natural right. It's before our republic. It's Lockean theory. It's what our founders drew upon as they gave us this awesome experiment that became the American Republic, became this constitutional republic. So you have to have that common ground. That is the Bill of Rights. That is that the individual is autonomous, that is above the state. Each individual then, if you do something wrong, needs to be prosecuted as an individual. Equal justice before law needs to mean something. And that equal justice has nothing to do with your ethnicity, with your gender, with how you look in any way, shape, or form. It only has to do with how you behave, what you've done. That's what you should be punished for. That's equal justice before the law. And if we start to lose those basic ideas, of property rights, even if there's to say it can be taken for any public purpose, which the far left has done before in this country, and start to erode property rights. No, it can only be taken for an actual public use. This is in the Bill of Rights. You start to just agree on those basic fundamentals of these are protecting us from the infringements from our government. Then you can have any other conversation, and you can develop those as we have, and you have common ground, and you can really talk to people, which is where we were in America for a very long time, where you could talk because you had that common ground. The classic liberal believed all that. And there's still Bill Maher is still one of them out there. There's still lots more out there. I don't think that a large percentage of the people is where the woke warrior is or the far right is. I think most of us are somewhere in the middle where we can talk about these things with that common foundational ground of individual liberty and then come to good decisions. It might not make good airtime for the Fox News and CNN and MSNBC and so on to say that kind of thing, to get into those kind of topics. They're deeper. But I think this is why podcasts like yours are taking off. People are hungry for this deeper discussion on what our foundational values are and what we're all standing purchased on, so that we can get back together and come to actually real, insightful, interesting, philosophical decisions about who we are and where we're going.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the Patriot Act is Bush 43 era.
Mm-hmm.
That took away some of our freedoms.
And both parties voted for that one.
Yes. Anytime we start falling into the trap, as you called it, and I agree, it's a trap, of following either political side dogmatically, treating it like a religion, as I've talked about on this show before, we're in trouble. And see, what happens is when anybody takes that middle ground, Romney, Manchin, certainly Bill Maher, they end up getting vilified by everybody in the media. Like, these people are the most dangerous people of all. And really, they're the ones in many ways who are most representative of the real actual population of Americans. And here's why that's important. Let's go back full circle to what I brought up at the very beginning, Frank. During lockdown, we were basically treated like mushrooms over social media. We were kept in the dark, locked up in our own homes, and fed BS in the form of social media narratives that were laden with logical fallacy. It's all or nothing. These people are bad, okay? And these people are good. And you follow your own little echo chamber of people. And there are so many people in that echo chamber that you can easily tell yourself this is what everybody thinks. You know, Peter Strzok, Hillary Clinton should have won 80 million to nothing. Well, that's someone who's been fed a fallacy from getting their news all from one source. So heck yeah, we should listen to CNN and Fox News and Daily Talk Radio and MSNBC. Read the opinions from everybody and then form your own opinion. Now, going along with that, Frank, there are people out there who would say, you're going to talk to me about the Constitution? That's archaic at best and racist at worst. And what they know is going to happen is people are so inundated with this information that they're being fed through artificially social sources, like we're talking about, social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc., that ain't nobody got time to actually go do the research. That's why people read headlines and make conclusions, and this is human nature, that will go along with what they already think and believe. They're looking to have their beliefs validated, which of course brings along all sorts of cognitive dissonance. But meanwhile, if we would just read the Constitution and ask ourselves the honest question, is this representative of God's inalienable rights for all of us? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, as it should be, if it's indeed timeless, then you can stop listening to all these pundits through the same filter you've been listening to them, perhaps, and look at it from a purely objective basis and ask yourself, why would people be so hell-bent on making the Constitution irrelevant? Because I don't hear any talk about replacing it with anything of equal substance. I just hear, hey, you know what? That's bad. Let's not replace it with anything. Kind of like they said that masculinity is toxic. Let's not replace it with anything. Just sit down and shut up. And I don't see any advancement of our freedoms in any way, shape, or form coming from an event where we all sit down and shut up. Do you?
No, and you look at the Constitution, and it's been amended over and over. It is a document that we can change, and it should be hard to change, and it is hard to change, but we have changed it. Once we had to fight a civil war before we were able to change it, to do away with slavery and to give equal protection and so on. We fought, and it purified it, and it taken this American experiment a long way. We can go a lot farther if we don't fight each other while giving up our foundational ideals like that. I wouldn't advise someone to try to only listen to the major cable networks and read some of the major papers to come to an informed opinion. It's gotten really difficult anymore to do that because of the narratives they're giving you and the simplicity of their arguments too often, with notable exceptions, of course. I would ask people, like you said, to read the Constitution, read the founding documents, and go a little deeper with podcasts, with an interesting person who has time, just doesn't have a 3-minute segment, but has actual time to get into a topic. And listen to both sides as you start to go into the intellectual side of it, and you'll pretty quickly be able to weigh what's right and what's wrong, where you are, who you are, and your beliefs then will evolve. And you'll find yourself more well-rounded if you are in a conversation, as you should be now and then, with someone you're dating or your spouse or what have you, a good friend, or even at a dinner table with people you don't really deeply know. You'll find that you're much more informed and able to accept their opinion and see their opinion, to ask them questions, which is so key to draw them into the conversation, and then to question them based on what they've said, so that both of you can learn and have this deeper experience because you have a shared system of respect and of values and understanding.
Yeah, there's an idea for you. Turn off the electronics and go back out and socialize in the real world again now that we can, and talk to real people. The first thing you guys are going to figure out, like Frank and I already have, gentlemen, is that nobody wants a civil war. Nobody's as angry about what you're reading as political topics and fodder for primetime news channel content in real life as they are on Twitter and on Facebook. Nobody's as angry. Everybody wants to get along. Everybody wants to continue being an American and living by our American values. And once someone does what you just suggested, Frank, which is get back out there and actually talk to people and hear what they have to say and discuss anything. First of all, you'll soon find out that people really don't want to talk about politics, at least not here in Texas, they don't. And, we got an election coming up, and I still don't get in embroiled conversations with people about it. Everybody just wants to talk about what they're interested in. People want to date. They want to relate. I mean, I talk to people I've never met before of all races, genders, colors, creeds, and we all really just want to be human with each other. And that's the way it should be. So I'll tell you what, Frank, if a guy's listening to this and it speaks to him and it's resonating with him and he's saying to himself, hey, you know what? I do need to be more of an independent thinker. I need to really be a lot more vigilant of doing what I'm doing simply because I'm told to do it. What are the first places he should start?
That's a good question. I would say to start reading foundational documents. And if you have the time to begin reading good biographies on the founding fathers and see why they were debating what they were debating. If you can even wade into it, the Federalist Papers, that philosophical discussion of why we are what we are is profound. What they were able to articulate there and how they did it in that very public forum really gave us the foundation for where we are in this nation. Talking to men, I don't think a lot of them are going to go into that deep reading kind of thing. But as you talk to people, just find shared values with them and listen to them and bring them out. I learn the most from discussions when it's somebody who has a very different life experience and often very different philosophy on things. For example, I was in a discussion with a professor from one of the New York universities, one of the SUNY universities here in New York State, not that long ago. And it was a wonderful, lively 45-minute discussion about various things. We could tell we had different politics, but it didn't really matter as we talked literature and went into different philosophies. But near the end of the discussion, he looks at me and goes, I can tell you're a conservative, and I just have to ask you a question. I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, why is it you think you have to keep reading? Professors like me have already taught you what you need to know. And he was actually baffled by a person who was willing to go out there and continue to learn, and continue to challenge things, really try to grow themselves. He thought I'd already been indoctrinated when I went to college. So why did I have to keep thinking? And I was so baffled and appalled and amused by that comment that I started laughing. And actually, at that point, we were able to take the discussion even deeper as I started to question him in a very nice way. And, we stayed in touch since then. And it's been, I don't think I've brought him very far philosophically. I mean, he teaches a course called Marx's Aesthetics, the beauty of Karl Marx. So we have very different views on the world and views of people and of individuality. But we were able to find that common ground, and I appreciate it. And I learned a lot from that discussion too.
Yeah, it is baffling that someone who is a professor in the higher education system would be nonplussed by someone who wants to continue to study and learn and think. It just doesn't make any sense.
But that's become a norm, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
My wife teaches in one of those esteemed universities. I'm around that culture a lot. And they're used to speaking to 18 to 22-year-olds who, are still developing. And they can kind of lead them some way. But they're not used to being challenged by someone older than that who has a lot of life experience, who perhaps has read a lot and thought a lot, and then could challenge them on some of their presumptions. They're shocked and they're uncomfortable very quickly, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems like there's a bit of a zombie apocalypse going on out there where people have a very dogmatic opinion. Yeah, they need to be right about it. They need you to be wrong about yours. And if you disagree with them, you're the bad person and the fascist, but they don't know why. They can't defend their position. You're just an idiot. And I don't have a whole lot of respect for people like that, but I'll tell you, you may disagree with me on any issue. As long as you can defend your position, I will respect you. I will respect you for being a thinking person. Different people have different personality types. You may make decisions based on your feelings towards an issue. Someone else may make decisions based on thought process and logic. And, basically I've just described the difference between the Democratic Liberal Party and the conservative Republicans right there. That's really the extent of it. But the reason why I like talking to other people, I think it comes down to the teachings of two different people that I think are right on the money. The first is Stephen Covey. I mean, his blockbuster book in the 80s, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of those 7 central habits was seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. That's powerful. You know, and what's wrong with that? What the heck's wrong with people nowadays? The other one is Jordan Peterson's rules for life. One of them is take the position that everyone you meet has something to teach you. If we're all so busy trying to prove other people wrong and the quest to be right is in full force, then what we're going to do is we're going to judge others and we're going to miss out on growth opportunities where we could evolve our thinking potentially simply because we're closed-minded. So
right.
I love everything you're saying.
Someone knows something you don't know, which is one of his rules, is so fundamentally important. My second favorite one of his rules is treat yourself like somebody you have to help. Both of those are just so perfect.
Yes. Oh, yeah, sure. And that comes back full circle to what, you know, you apparently adopted as such a radical way of thinking, which is I should keep learning and I should keep growing and evolving. Yeah. You know, I wrote a blog post and I'm going to put it in the show notes for these guys. And I simply titled it Free. And it was kind of a little bit of a Jedi mind trick to name it that because the first line of it is, I bet you're expecting to get something for nothing based on the simple one-word title of this post. And I don't disappoint those guys. I give them a free download to the same things you can download for free from mountaintoppodcast.com, frankly. I'm giving those away. But the point is, just because something is free of charge and it makes your life easier, doesn't mean it's enhancing your freedoms. It may be taking them away. You know, this is such a crude example, but it's so right on the money in my mind, Frank, as I think of the movie Slumdog Millionaire, where the little poor kids are drawn in when the guy who looks like a good guy and giving them an opportunity just gives them a Coca-Cola. He just dangles a Coca-Cola in front of them and they're all in. And then the next thing you know, a couple scenes later, abominable things are happening to these little kids. You know, don't want to drop a whole lot of spoiler alerts there. And then along came Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, who, yes, the Sandinistas are back in charge down there. Did you even know that? Same guy. And when we visited Nicaragua, you know, as tourists, it's a beautiful country with plenty to do. It's like Costa Rica, only less expensive. Just a wonderful place with wonderful people. I asked them how the Sandinistas managed to get in power again. And he said, well, simply, he promised everybody a check for 25 or 30 US dollars if he got elected. And it was enough. And that's what I thought of was Slumdog Millionaire. He just dangled a Coca-Cola in front of everybody, and they were desperate enough that they took it. And then in the 2020 election, what happened? Vote for me, and I'll make sure you get your $2,500 stimulus check. Well, Americans were still being bought off. It just took a little bit more cashola to do it. It's still the same thing. I will give you something and make you feel good, so vote for me. And the central point of that blog post, which of course you read and commented on, and I appreciate that, Frank, is that free isn't freedom. You know, a lot of guys who have fought for our country, you know, and seen people die for our country around them like to say, hey, freedom isn't free. Well, why not reverse that turn of phrase and say free isn't freedom? Because if you're being given something and you're being lulled to sleep in this comfort familiarity zone and you're comfortable, nothing's wrong, you're not in pain, and it seems ostensibly on the surface that your life is being made better by aforementioned stimulus checks or whatever. Heck, you don't even have to go to work anymore. Then why shouldn't I vote for those guys? But see, that's your ability to make your own decisions on many levels being eroded away. So I'm so glad we had this conversation today, Frank. And what I want to do is I want to send these guys to your website, which is indeed frankminiter.com. But if you guys go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Frank, that will also take you there. So you only have to remember the word Frank. And at the top of my Amazon influencer queue, I'm going to put at least 2 of Frank's books for you. One of them is called The Ultimate Man Survival Guide. And the other one, as we talked about in the last show, is This Will Make a Man of You. And you guys will know immediately that Frank's on your side. He's on the side of all virtuous men. We're talking about virtuous masculinity here, not the toxic variety. And that's why I respect and appreciate you, my friend. And Frank Miniter, thanks so much for coming on our show today.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Always good to be here. Good to listen to your show. It's always insightful. I always learn a lot. And even better to speak with you.
Yeah, man, likewise. I'm so glad we got to know each other several years ago and that we're keeping that friendship alive and staying in touch. It's powerful. I really appreciate you too, man. And guys, if you haven't been to mountaintoppodcast.com lately, I said at the outset of the show, I've revamped it. A lot of new stuff there. You can download a free book called Sticking Point Solved, another free book called Dealing with Breakups, and another free book called Deserve What You Want, which is actually my first book I ever published. And it usually goes for $37 all day long in the X&Y Communications store. It's yours for free. One thing that hasn't changed is you can still get on the phone with me and talk for free 25 minutes about where you are right now and what you want to accomplish in terms of your success with women. Guys, I'm not the coach for basket cases. I'm the coach for guys who are doing good already but just aren't quite satisfied with the level of women they're getting in their life, and they know that they deserve more, hence the title of my book, Deserve What You Want, right? Sign up for free. You'll find out that I'm the same guy you think I'm going to be, and all of that and more is there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.